Welcome to Mind My Age, presented by Total Life. I'm your host, Neela Brar. Today we have an extraordinary guest, Dr. John E. Lewis. Dr. Lewis is a former full-time associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. He is a diplomat, faculty member, and advisor of the Medical Wellness Association. Dr. Lewis has an extensive background in nutrition, brain health, and immune function with over 180 peer-reviewed publications. He has been the principal investigator of over 30 different studies on human health in his research career. Welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Neelam, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Dr. Lewis, at Mind My Age, we believe that your mind controls your health. So I'd like to start with a question we ask all of our guests. How old do you feel and why?
I'm still, even though I'm past middle age at this point, I still feel like I'm pretty young in the sense of my physical and intellectual and mental capacities are no different than they were 30 years ago. I still train very hard every day. I work out very vigorously every single day. And for me, that's one of the most important pillars of health. So I don't know, maybe 25, 30. I mean, I definitely have some aches and pains that I didn't used to have 20 or 30 years ago. So that's an unfortunate part of aging that we all deal with. But in terms of what I can still do, I don't have any real limitations, I don't think, at this point in my life.
Wow, that's amazing. The youngest I've felt lately is maybe 30, but 25, that's a new goal.
I'm still very strong physically. Like I said, I train very hard every day, and unless I'm traveling or sick or something, I always manage to get in my training regardless of how much I work. And that's one of my pet peeves in life of people who say, "Oh, I don't have time to work out," or "I don't have time for this," or "I don't have time for that." To me, that's a failure to allocate your time properly, because you have to take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, eventually the medical system is going to not take care of you. They're going to damage you and put you through the ringer that's going to ultimately end your life shorter than it would have otherwise. So you have to make time to take care of your body. Otherwise, you're no good to yourself or anyone else.
Right. And that takes a strong mind and a willpower.
Consistency, habit, routine, lots of words you can use to describe basically the same thing. You just have to make it a priority. It has to become part of your regular routine, just like brushing your teeth or, eating a meal, taking a poop, going to the bathroom, taking a shower, whatever. All these things are just part of our regular daily routine, and exercise, physical activity has to be part of that. It has to. I mean, we're meant to move. Unfortunately, we sit around in buildings and offices for the most of our day, and we sleep in a bed for 6 or 8 hours, but still, you're telling me you can't carve out 30 or 40 or 60 minutes to move your body? To me, that's just an excuse.
I love your approach to that, because I'm guilty, right? It's so easy for me to come up with reasons not to go to the gym and not work out. I've started to take baby steps where I'm taking steps, right? So 10,000 steps is my goal. Sometimes I hit 20,000. If I'm at 5,000, I forgive myself, but I try better the next day. And I'm slowly starting to build that resilience.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it too, right? If you've been sedentary for a while and you don't feel like you're in very good shape, so you don't want to just overexert coming back into a routine. You want to build your way up to something that's sustainable and something that your body can adapt to without you feeling like you're in excruciating pain, and then that soreness from activity discourages you and keeps you from continuing to make progress. So if you've been sedentary for a long time, I'm not saying immediately go and do a 90-minute workout. I'm not suggesting that either, but certainly, once you get up to a level where you can have some sort of an effect on your body's physical capacity, that's the point where you now want to say, okay, I need to maintain this. Consistency is so important. And if you look at, just sort of general exercise principles, consistency and intensity are the two that I would argue are the most important. You need to be consistent, and then you need to hit a certain level of intensity that stimulates adaptation in the body, because that is part of the process of benefiting from exercise. Is you have to adapt to the stress that you're putting your body under. And then as you become more fit, obviously there's a diminishing point of diminishing returns, like in economic theory. You have that curve where it plateaus. As you get higher up on the curve, it plateaus more. But you still, you want to push yourself. You want to make sure that the body is adapting to the stressor that it is being stimulated by, and that's the way that you continue benefiting from it.
Dr. Lewis, what's the most groundbreaking discovery or realization you've had during your research on brain health?
Oh gosh, without question, it's the work that my colleagues and I have done on polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran. And most people think of the word sugar as something very bad for us, but I'd like to tell all of your listeners that the word sugar is a very misused word, and Mother Nature makes many different sugars. And so sugars depend on not only their source, but their chemical complexity, their biochemical structure. And so high fructose corn syrup is a monosaccharide that most people will agree that is not good for you. You probably want to avoid it, if not eliminate it entirely. It spikes your glucose, it spikes your insulin, will cause metabolic complications over time. But that's a very different sugar from the polysaccharides that come from aloe vera and rice bran. And we know through recorded history, humans have been using aloe vera for millennia. I don't know so much about rice, but obviously a lot of the world eats rice. Unfortunately, they eat the wrong kind. They eat white rice that has the bran stripped off. And the bran is the most nutritious part of the rice kernel. But the discoveries that we made in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, and in the face of having, if you've had any family member or close friend that has had this disease, you know how tragic and terrible it is, that it really has, from any conventional perspective, no treatment. Gosh, we can't even come to a consensus from the scientific community of what causes it. Now people are throwing around this term type 3 diabetes, which I think is a gross oversimplification of what dementia is. That to me is just way too oversimplified. But we showed in response to this particular dietary supplement formula that people had clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive function in taking this dietary supplement. And again, people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. So number one, those are people that Big Pharma cares nothing about. Big Pharma doesn't want to study people at that level of severity. They've already given up on that. So they're looking for, to try to help people if they can with mild cognitive impairment, which is the step before dementia, or if you've been newly diagnosed with moderate or mild dementia, they might be interested in studying you then. But when you're at the stage that we studied the folks, they don't care about those people. So our finding was just unreal. And supporting that on the cellular level, we showed improvements in immune function according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio. We reduced inflammation according to TNF alpha and VEGF, which are two proteins commonly looked at in people with cancer or heart disease. We also showed an improvement in the adult stem cell production process of just under 300% according to CD14 cells. So there were a lot of really amazing findings. And in fact, we're continuing to publish, even though I'm not in academics full-time anymore, we're continuing to publish some of the most exciting and profound and helpful results from our research program. But by far, these polysaccharides, anything else that I studied in my academic career, whether it was some other type of dietary supplement, any type of dietary modification, exercise training, some other sort of behavioral intervention, nothing else compared to these polysaccharides. And it's so simple. You take these in a dietary supplement. It's not like you have to, modify your diet or get somebody to show up to the gym 3 or 4 times a week. These are much more intense, more difficult types of behavioral modifications. But just telling somebody, here, take this dietary supplement, for most people, that's doable. Most people can actually incorporate improving their health by just adding a dietary supplement into their regimen.
Dr. Lewis, what are some simple changes to the diet that one can make to expand their access through natural foods to polysaccharides? Or diet changes that you've seen in your research that can dramatically improve cognitive function for folks that are still earlier in their aging process?
Again, with these polysaccharides, you really will almost have to get them in a dietary supplement simply because I don't know about you. I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera.
I
Aloe
do.
vera gel.
My mom actually has me taking shots of it every day. So last night, actually, when I came back from a long trip and it was pretty excruciating, that's the first thing I did when I came home. I took a shot of aloe vera, and I've tried to incorporate it into my day to day. I don't know how much of that is enough, but yeah, I'm curious.
So that shot of aloe vera juice that you took, that's 99% water. So it's a very diluted treatment, if you will, of what you took. So what I'm referring to is, first of all, taking all that water out. So that's most of the material. Then you still have other nutrients and phytonutrients that are found inside the gel. So you want to get rid of those too, because aloe vera is not really your best source of, protein or fatty acids or other vitamins and minerals, but it is your best source of these particular polysaccharides. And so get rid of all that other material and now take the polysaccharides and concentrate them into a powder where you can have a therapeutic or physiological benefit. So that's the reason why we use the product that we use. And the reason why we can demonstrate efficacy is because we have concentrated it into a dose or an amount that can have benefit. I'm not saying your aloe vera gel or juice is not helpful. It's fine. Keep doing what you're doing. But in terms of getting any therapeutic benefit from the polysaccharides in that drink, you're not getting it. You're not able to get enough polysaccharide content in the gel to have any real benefit. And so that's one thing. Rice bran, again, 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. So the rice bran has been stripped off of that in the milling process. Unfortunately, the rice bran is either typically fed to livestock or thrown away. So humanity is not really benefiting from the best part of the rice kernel because, again, it's either getting thrown away in the milling process or it's getting saved and then fed to cows and pigs and chickens. But those would be, if you get them in a dietary supplement like what we use, those would be two things that I would tell anybody is a very simple recommendation for being able to get, nutritional value from these two particular plants that Mother Nature provides to us. And then, in general, I mean, you think of one thing that people can do that, maybe you talk about all different types of nutrients, phytonutrients, foods, different types of foods. The easiest thing that I've heard that some people say to others about, just something that you can easily remember is eat the rainbow, right? Eat as many different colors as you can. And then that way you get the widest range of nutrients and phytonutrients that Mother Nature provides to us. If you just do that simple little rule or, follow that as your policy, then that way you're really covered. But of course, there are variations and other characteristics of that as well. It's not just that simple, but it is sort of a generic way of thinking about how you can eat the best nutritional content in the widest variety is just simply eating different colors every day.
I love that. In fact, I've incorporated that to mentorship I give my niece about eating. Whenever I see her plate, and I always remind her, like, where are the colors? She loves chicken strips and fries, and that's not colorful.
No.
So coming back to your research and the experience you've had, what's one common misconception about nutrition that you frequently encounter?
Oh, I would say the biggest one, being somebody who's eaten a plant-based diet for now 27 years, is people tend to think that you can only get nutrition or you can only get the best nutrition from eating animals, and especially protein, of course. We're so just bombarded with the idea of protein as being the end-all, be-all of nutritional existence. And I mean, I'm living proof, and lots of other people are too, that you don't need to eat animals to be healthy. So I think that to me is the number one misconception that you just constantly hear, especially with this now more recent interest in the carnivore diet, which to me is just sort of a variation on Atkins, which was, I think Atkins started his movement back in the late 80s or 90s. I don't remember exactly when, but carnivore is not really that much of a new idea. It's just a different name and maybe just a slightly different twist on what Atkins started several decades ago.
Because you've committed to a plant-based diet, do you feel that moderation, even if you include meat, is great and sustainable for longevity, or do you feel that one does not need protein from animals and can be completely sustaining on a plant-based diet?
I've been at this for a long time now, and I mean, I'm a study of N of one, so obviously that doesn't apply to the 8+ billion people out there. That's only applying to me. But one interesting line of research that I would encourage you and your listeners or your viewers to look into is that of Valter Longo at the University of Southern California. He's been at the longevity line of research for many years, and interestingly, most recently, what he showed when he's been developing, I don't know if you've heard of this fasted mimicking diet that he came up with a couple of years ago. It's looking at the effects of a 5-day fast in a 30-day period. And in addition to the benefits of fasting, what Longo and his colleagues have been showing is that if you actually switch from animal protein to plant protein, you actually increase longevity, the body's ability, and this is in different species, whether it's in cells or multi-cell species, rodents, even going into humans and other animals, that if you switch from animal-based protein to plant-based protein, you actually turn off some of these things that accelerate aging. So it's a very fascinating line of research. And I mean, I'm certainly no expert in all of that, but Longo has been at this for a couple of decades now, and I find his research to be pretty exciting, and it actually sort of confirms what I kind of intuitively was, I guess you could say in my own intuition of looking into what I wanted to do for my own life and how I wanted to take care of my body. It's really fascinating, particularly in some of the work he's showing that, for example, the amino acids, glutamine, methionine, and the branch chain amino acids are the ones that seem to be that hold the key to sort of this discovery of where the body or where any animal's body can differentiate the difference between a protein coming from an animal source and a protein coming from a plant source. And so these are very important things that unfortunately the carnivore, keto, paleo crowd tend to ignore. They don't really, talk about longevity. I mean, they're all about weight loss or fat loss or, building muscle mass, which obviously are important things to do as well. I'm not saying, that we don't need protein. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if you're constantly gorging yourself on these very high amounts of protein every day, especially from animal sources instead of plant sources, you may be going down the wrong path.
Absolutely. And what would you say for our listeners that are interested in incorporating more plant-based protein? Like, what are some of the easy foods that they should be purchasing at the local grocery store?
Well, the typical things, I mean, for example, I like to eat baked tofu a couple of times a week. I mean, soy always gets a bad name, right? It always gets a bad rap, but yet soy is a very nutritionally dense plant, and if you buy it organic, I don't see anything wrong with that. So, bake your soy a couple of times a week, bake your tofu. Nuts and seeds, obviously, they have a wide variety of different amino acids and fatty acids, along with other vitamins and minerals. So that's a good source of protein. Greens actually have a lot of protein. People don't realize that, but yet think back to the cartoon from, nearly 100 years ago now. I don't remember when Popeye was first created, but he didn't reach for a can of tuna. He reached for a can of spinach, right? So, I mean, anything leafy green is going to have a decent amount of protein in it. And then, of course, all of your beans, all of your legumes. I mean, lentils. If I grew up eating beans, even though we ate a lot of animal food growing up in my house, we still ate a lot of beans as well. So beans obviously are very rich in protein as well. So really, there's no shortage of getting plenty of protein in your plant food. It's just a matter of, again, kind of peeling back the onion, so to speak, to say, well, wait a minute, I don't have to have a steak or a hamburger or sausage or ham or, whatever, fish, chicken, whatever it is that people think you can only get protein from. And in fact, ask yourself, where do all of those animals get their protein from? Because they're not carnivores, they're not cannibals, so they're not eating their own relatives. They're getting their protein from plants. And so basically it's just it's for humans, it's sort of an indirect route to getting the protein, but yet it's coming from an animal source, but yet those same animals were getting their protein from plants. So, you can look at this so many different ways. And I'm not really, at this point in my life, I'm not here to argue with people. I'm sure there'll be people that listen to me talk about this and they'll say, oh, that guy's crazy. I want to continue eating my steak or chicken or fish or whatever. And if you think if that's what you want to do, go for it. I don't, to me, it doesn't really matter. You can look at the science and you can look at any article and pick it apart in terms of flaws or say that it doesn't make sense or, well, they should have done this or they should have done that. But if you look at a large body of research, there's a consistent message out there that says, again, and Longo is one of the people, maybe not necessarily touting this as big as some of the other people like Colin Campbell, for example, who wrote the book, The China Study. I know that book's been ripped apart by a lot of critics, but you have other people like John McDougall, who unfortunately just recently died. He had apparently had a stroke very early in life and then shifted to a plant-based diet. He just recently passed away a couple of weeks ago. But there have been lots of people that have, tried to push the more of a plant-based centric approach who, have got a lot of science behind them. And, again, you can criticize science all day long. I mean, anybody can criticize all the science my colleagues and I have published. There's no such thing as perfect research. Every study has flaws. It's just you have to take nutritional science and then look at consistent patterns. And what many consistent patterns show is that eating a more predominantly plant-based diet in general is healthy for you, whether it's extending your longevity, hopefully your quality of life, just not your length of life, right? Your health span, not your lifespan. Reducing your risks of the major killers, whether it's cardiovascular disease or cancer or diabetes or dementia. All these different things have been shown in populations and in groups where they are eating these types of diet patterns. They tend to avoid these types of diseases more often, and they also tend to live a better, longer life. And so, again, this goes very contrarian to this more recent interest in paleo, keto, carnivore that, I'm sorry, folks, just don't take my word for it. Go to PubMed and start doing your own literature searches and discover this for yourself. I mean, I think to me, that's the best thing that you can do for anyone who has a curiosity or, who wants to satisfy these questions is do your own homework. Don't just listen to some talking head just because he or she, presents himself or herself as an expert. Go back and verify that person's information. I mean, do the same thing with my work. Go to PubMed and type in Lewis and pull up the articles that we've published from our work in Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis and in some of these other areas, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, anything that I would recommend to you and your viewers or your listeners is anything that I'm doing for myself and taking for myself. I'm not telling people do one thing and then meanwhile, I'm living another way. That to me is that's the height of hypocrisy, and that's not who I am. And so anything that I'm talking about and I believe in is based in some level of grounded science and also my own personal experience.
I was at a recent conference where it was mentioned that on average, older adults are 10 years behind their lifespan when you're thinking about health span. So there's a really large gap there where folks ideally would be living healthier throughout their entire life. What are your recommendations outside of what we've already discussed, which is protein from a plant-based diet? What are other recommendations that you would suggest to improve longevity and immune function?
Well, one of the biggest problems that people have today is being either insufficient or deficient in vitamin D. And that's really sad for several reasons. One, because vitamin D has been shown to be involved in at least 4,500 different genes out of our 30, 40,000. So it's a very significant nutrient in terms of what it does, way more than just bone health. And, a lot of times people hear vitamin D and they just think, oh, well, that's important for my bones, but they don't consider actually vitamin D is involved in just about every process you can imagine. So, but unfortunately, about 70% of Americans are either insufficient or deficient. And if you're not living in, like South Florida or other parts of the southern portions of our country, maybe if you're living in Minnesota or Oregon or somewhere up there, you probably are not getting as much sunshine as people in the southern latitudes. But if you're not, even if you're not, it's a cheap, inexpensive source of a dietary supplement that doesn't cost a lot of money, and so there's really no excuse not to be taking your vitamin D every day if you're not getting out in the sun for 15, 20 minutes a day to get that UVB radiation that your body then converts into this pro-hormone called vitamin D that's just so crucial to our existence. So that's definitely one. Number two would be fiber. Something like 13, 14, 15% of Americans are only that many people are getting enough fiber every day. And we need more fiber as we age. Fiber is very important because it helps to eliminate a lot of waste and byproducts of metabolism that accumulates in the gut. And so if you're not eating enough fiber, you're not pooping properly, you're not pooping frequently enough, and you're not pooping out all that other stuff that can tend to accumulate over time and cause us lots of problems. So fiber is obviously very, very important. And where do you get your fiber? Through your vegetables primarily. And so you need to eat plenty of unprocessed vegetables every day to get your fiber. Water, hydration, that's another one. People are typically walking around dehydrated. People should be drinking, it's different for everybody depending on your body type and your metabolism and whatnot. But I would say at least 2, 3, 4 liters of water every day. And of course, you need to drink filtered water. You need to drink good quality water. And there's not some water that's got too much fluoride in it, among other things. But I mean, those to me are, fairly basic things that I would suggest people look into. You can get your vitamin D tested very easily. It's pretty cheap. I think it's $20, $25 to get your vitamin D tested. And do that immediately. I mean, look into what your vitamin D status is and then start taking your 5,000 units every day. Start eating your, 3, 4, 5 servings of vegetables every day. Start drinking your water every single day. You're sitting at your desk working, have your glass or your container of water right there with you. And, every few minutes, take a few sips of water. And so again, these are just basics. There are lots of other things that I wouldn't call are in my wheelhouse, but things like stress management, getting proper sleep, these are things, sleep hygiene. Obviously, we have a population of people that have chronic insomnia and other types of sleeping disorders. So, these are also things that work into that definition or that, those different pillars that we have that would, you would label or classify as your foundation of being healthy. So these are things that are very important. And if you're smoking, I mean, obviously it should go without saying at this point, after all of the decades of looking into all the ramifications of using tobacco. If you're using tobacco at this point, man, what are you doing? I mean, really, why? Why in the world would you smoke a cigarette at this point? Even alcohol, people still think, oh, I'm going to drink my red wine every day for dinner because it's got resveratrol and all this. But man, look at all the research. I mean, even for women especially, just a little bit of alcohol every day drives a greater risk of breast cancer for women. So don't think that you can only get resveratrol from red wine. Plenty of fruits and vegetables have resveratrol. That's a very misleading thing that people tend to believe in related to this amazing antioxidant called resveratrol. It doesn't just come from red wine. And so don't think that you need to have your glass of red wine with dinner every day to do that or to receive the benefit from that. You get plenty of resveratrol from other fruits and vegetables. So this idea that, oh, well, I'm just going to have, one drink every day and somehow that's healthy. That's really, that's not a good way of approaching your life either. So I don't know. These are just some of the things that come to mind as I'm thinking about, how you would advise someone to help change or to try to, do an inventory or sort of I think, again, an inventory of your behavior and your attitudes and what you think go into being healthy. And then do those things actually align with what the science shows? And again, I'm not trying to sound like Anthony Fauci and say, oh, well, if you question this or that, then you're not, you're not a scientist or you don't believe in the science. But again, there are lots of political things that go into that as well. So something that could be funded by, the dairy industry or the alcohol industry or whatever to show a particular thing we know can happen. But outside of those kinds of political, financial conflicts of interest, when you look at certain findings that may not necessarily go or be aligned with, what you think of commonly as the way of living or the way of being or your attitude, that's where you really need to kind of, do a double take and say, okay, am I doing the right thing here?
Interesting you say that because growing up, I remember when that study came out and it was all over the news and every radio station talked about 2 glasses of wine and it's good for your life. And at the time I was too young to understand that it depends on who paid for that study, right? And that's what's so fantastic about the world we live in today. Like that research is now available at your fingertips, and you can go one step further and ask that question: who paid for this study? What other studies have been done? If more than one hasn't been done to prove it, or if the sample size wasn't large enough, it's not a good study. It's a good headline, but it's not a good study. When we think about some of these easy changes that you've mentioned, right? Like number 1, add vitamin D to your diet. Number 2, or get that 15 to 20 minutes of sun every day. Number 2, drink more water. Number 3, rice bran. Number 4, aloe vera supplement. And the list goes on. Vegetables, 3 to 4 servings a day. I mean, that's something that everybody can incorporate into their day-to-day. What are your thoughts on folks that talk about like drinking a liter of water before you do anything else, versus like spreading that water out throughout your day? I know my mom, for example, her whole life, she wakes up and before she drinks chai, she is downing 2 glasses of water, and she's just done that as a habit. And lately, now that I study water and the first thing you put into your body, I'm like, wait, mom knew something that I like. There's science behind this now. And it's so interesting because by background I'm Indian, and even the plant-based diet is something that I grew up embracing, and so a lot of this is now becoming proven to be better for you. Fasting is another one that the Indian culture has been doing for centuries. So it is really interesting that the science is backing up the cultural norms.
Absolutely. Well, I think, when you wake up, your body obviously is coming out of one state. And so you're trying to awaken the organs. You're having a little bit of an increase in your cortisol, where that will peak over the rest of the morning and into the early afternoon. So all these things will help to get you going and to get you started in your day. And so this idea of taking some water, I mean, I'm always drinking water, so I'm kind of guilty of just drinking water from the moment I get up till the last thing before I go to sleep. I'm having some water, but yeah, I think it's, hydration is just so important. And depending on our stage in life, we're somewhere between 60 something and 80, nearly 80% water. So to be dehydrated is obviously a very big problem. And so we need that water to help us enable all of our metabolic processes. So it's interesting to look at, as you said, some of these maybe more historical, cultural habits that evolved out of, whatever people's own intuition or their ability to be able to discern things prior to formal scientific methodology. But now you have the ability to take formal scientific methodology and then apply that to some of these cultural, historical habits and methods, and then to be able to say, yeah, that actually is true. That actually is a good thing to do. So I don't think there's any downside to always having water with you and always drinking water. I don't see a downside to it. Of course, we can drown, there could be too much of a good thing as well. You don't want to drown on your water in the ocean or a lake or a river or something, but and not not in the drowning context. There's really no downside to drinking plenty of water every day.
Fasting has become something that the Western culture is speaking about more and more, whether it's a OMAD diet, one meal a day, or doing 24-hour fasts, or alternating within the week. Obviously, there's cultures out there, mine included, where fasting is something that's done regularly. And it's my personal goal to get to myself to a 3-day fast and then eventually a 5-day fast, because I've just read so much great science around cellular rejuvenation. For older adults that want to discover the benefits of fasting, what is your advice, and how can they get there?
I would go back to what I said earlier in our conversation about what Longo has showed. So, a lot of times fasting is difficult for people. I mean, as I'm sure you know, we have a country of food addicts. That's the reason why we have 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. So clearly there's a level of food addiction that a lot of Americans are dealing with today that's going completely unsupported by a psychologist or some other mental health professional. People are trying to figure this out on their own, and they're struggling and they don't know what to do. But rather than, and again, I'm just kind of leaning on what Longo has showed. His research has showed that you don't even have to work your way up to like some, really serious fast that the Muslims do for Ramadan and that sort of thing, or even the Catholics do for Lent. I don't know about the Hindus or what the Indians do per se, but obviously, there are certain religious practices around these very, very long extended fasts where I think in some cases they even deny themselves water, which I don't know that I totally agree with. But even getting, getting into Longo's approach where he only looks at a 5-day window. So in a 30-day period, if you just want to break it down into months, basically, just take 5 days out of that 30 and then fast. And of course, you're still drinking water, but you're not eating anything. You just drink, keep hydrated, but not any food. And then in that 5-day window, you will actually get basically the same metabolic benefits that you would in getting into these other longer, more extended fasts that for, the average food addicted American is not even going to come close to being able to doing. It's certainly not out in the beginning. I mean, maybe over time, if you, as you were alluding to, kind of work your way up, you start with 1 day and then maybe go to 2 and then 3, and then work your way up to whatever it is you're trying to get to. But there can be a downside to this in the sense of autophagy is another one of these words that gets thrown around a lot today that you hear about, and you think, well, what the heck does that mean? And so autophagy is this idea that the cells have the capacity, if they're provided the right environment, to be able to sort of clean themselves out, right? They take different parts of the cells that may be degrading or may not be functioning properly, and then within this autophagy, the cell can say, okay, well, I'm going to eliminate this part of the cell because it's not functioning properly. So it's kind of like housekeeping, right? It's like your spring cleaning. You've neglected cleaning your house for a long time, and now you're in the springtime and you're going to, clean out all the debris and whatnot. But there can be a downside to this because it's kind of like anything else. You can have too much of a good thing. If you go to an extreme, there actually can be some downsides to this whole notion of, autophagy. I mean, and where this is really going is that the bottom line is we still need nutrition. I mean, at some point you can get too much into a good thing in the sense of denying yourself the vitamins, the minerals that the body needs for too long of a period of time. And that may not necessarily be a good thing. In the short term, for helping you lose weight, especially if you're morbidly obese or something, that's okay. But you may be sacrificing some long-term benefits related to your overall lifespan in this idea of, short-term sort of needs, if you will. And so there's actually another concept related to this called the triage theory that Dr. Bruce Ames came up with about 15 years ago, where he said the body has this amazing capacity. There are about 40, what he refers to as essential dietary factors, vitamins, minerals, other things like omega-3 fatty acids that the body needs to function every day. And the body, in its own inherent intelligence, has the capacity to allow for deficiencies in the short term for survival, or even in the case of reproduction. But what happens is, if you continue doing that day after day over a long enough period of time, you eventually predispose yourself for greater things like neurodegeneration, cancer, and heart disease. And so obviously that would shorten your life. And so I would very much encourage people, if you're thinking about fasting, just to not go overboard. Much the same if you've been sedentary and you haven't been exercising, don't go overboard. You really want to work your way into that, and just not go overboard too soon. But again, go to PubMed, type in Longo, Longo, Valter, Valter, not Walter, but Valter, and look at the research that he and his colleagues have published on, again, longevity that we mentioned earlier in the conversation, and then this fasted mimicking diet. And I think many of your listeners will find Longo's research to be very credible and very comprehensive, and really to help people get a better idea of how they can fast in a way that they can not only do it, but that they can gain maximum benefit and value from it.
Great. And honestly, I think it's also important, as the audience is listening, to consult with your doctor before you try anything, especially if you're on multiple medications. Dr. Lewis, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for sharing your invaluable insights and experiences. Listeners, if you're inspired by today's conversation, visit totallife.com to learn more about and sign up for resources that can help you age well. Remember, it's never too late to start taking care of your mental and physical health. So stay engaged, stay mindful, stay healthy, and keep thriving. Until next time, this is Neelam Brar signing off.